put to us the question, what kind of Canada do we want in the future? I can give a very quick answer to it. And it is, I don't want one like the last winter. And climate change, the last winter, may just have something in common. I have cousins still in southeast England. They've had a winter of flood. I have cousins in the center of New Brunswick. The river is still rising where they live. This is now. When I first heard about climate change, it was seemed a kind of academic subject. Very interesting, but remote. Now it's as close as a few months ago. So it's great to have the challenge we've just heard, and I find great inspiration from the response that I see in front. This is a great meeting, Lynn, and I congratulate you and everyone that worked with you to put it together. And now we're going to hear from our third speaker. I'm looking forward to hearing her because up until tonight, I've just been one of her readers. And it's going to be great to hear Linda McQuaig, who is a former candidate of the New Democrat Party, but best known as an award-winning journalist and best-selling author. So, Linda,
Thank you, Reg, for those very kind words. And let me just say how honored I am to be invited to be part of this panel of distinguished parliamentarians, truly distinguished, all three of them. And I'm not even elected, you know.
Yeah, not yet.
You know, they talk about mere trained seals, like I'm a failed mere trained seal. But in any event, I am delighted to be here. And I guess I wanted to talk a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about the issue of climate change, kind of what Reg was just getting into there. Because before getting on to the issue of proportional representation, etc., I mean, I know everybody in this room cares and is deeply concerned about climate change, but it's so important that we keep reminding ourselves how absolutely urgent this issue is. So for instance, I always like to remind myself that this enormous international community of scientists, climate scientists, have told us clearly that we must keep the increase in the temperature to no more than 2 degrees Celsius. You know, they've made it absolutely clear that if it goes beyond that, anything beyond that, it is really catastrophic. Like, they can't even really describe what is in store for us. Okay, 2 degrees Celsius. Where are we now? We are at 0.8 degrees increase in temperature. In other words, we're not even halfway to the point that international scientists agree is catastrophic. And the other number that is so stunning to me is that, and again, this is, you know, the International Energy Association makes this point, as do many others, that in order to have any hope of remaining below that 2 degree increase in temperature, we must keep at least two-thirds of all the fossil fuel reserves that are known currently. We must keep them in the ground. Okay, and in order to do that, what that will mean is that big fossil, you know, the big fossil fuel companies, who own those reserves, own the rights to those reserves around the world, will have to be willing to walk away from an estimated profit in the range of $20 trillion. What do you think the chances of that happening easily are? So, you know, in fact, quite the opposite. Rather than, you know, focusing on how much we have to keep in the ground, we're furiously pumping it out as fast as we possibly can all over the world. And Canada, of course, is one of the most serious offenders, one of, you know, particularly odious record. No restraints in any meaningful way on the development of the tar sands. Stephen Harper is hell-bent, and he says this, to turning this into a petro-state. You know, and his record is absolutely atrocious when you think of, in terms of not, you know, gutting our environmental review processes, muzzling government scientists trying to speak out on climate change, and harassing with intimidating audits the environmental groups that are doing anything about the issue. I have no hesitation in describing the Harper government as the worst government we've ever had in this country, without any comparison. Somehow we've gone from climate change denial to sort of this weird kind of climate change acceptance. You know, that it's, well, it's here, we got to adjust to it. Somehow we never got to the stage, the crucial stage of climate change resistance, you know, which is where we really have to be. You know, it also strikes me that a lot of the public commentary on this is kind of odd. You know, people are trying to grapple with the question, you know, why is it, given all that we know and how we're kind of on the edge of a cliff here, about to go over, how come so little gets done? And some very weird answers are given. There was even a, you know, on the CBC radio, The Current, which obviously has very intelligent commentary, they had a thing recently on this question of sort of why so little gets done, and they had on, for instance, a student council representative from BC, and she was saying, well, I think everything that is said about climate change is just too negative. You know? No, I'm not kidding. We should focus more on the positive, and of course there is a lot of positive green technology that should be focused on. But she said, it's too negative, it's too alarmist. It turns people off. You know, as if this is some kind of entertainment or something that we need to be constantly entertained to keep our attention. I mean, I think it's got to be alarmist. We have got to be alarmed at what we're facing. The other tendency, and it came up in that radio show as well, is this notion that you hear a lot, sort of, that we should sort of blame ourselves, you know, that we haven't done enough. And God knows, obviously it's true. None of us have individually done enough. We don't drive the right cars or bicycles or whatever. But I would quickly add, we would quickly adapt to that if governments put the right incentive systems in place, like, you know, instead of being neutral, you know, instead of subsidizing the oil industry, and you know, why not make, you know, taxes so that SUVs and cars like that can subsidize electric cars? I mean, if you did stuff like that, you'd quickly find people adopting. But the real point I want to make is actually all this sort of self-agonizing. There was a guy on that radio show who said, well, it's something to do with our, you know, denial of death. You know, all that kind of, it sounded kind of interesting when he said it actually, but all that takes away, it kind of obscures the real culprit, the real people behind the curtain, which are the oil companies and the governments that are in bed together, obstructing international efforts to make progress against climate change. And that's the key thing. We can't, you know, blame ourselves all we want, but let's not lose focus on the real people that are blocking climate change action, which is big fossil and governments like the Harper government. You know, there's these incredible efforts being put forward, you know, all the way back to Kyoto at the international level, and there are systematic attempts by the fossil fuel industry, been very well documented, and with the help of governments like the Harper government. So it's not just sort of like, you know, oh geez, you know, people just don't seem worried about these things. Polls show people are in fact extremely worried about climate change. But there's actual huge powers out there. I mean, the fossil fuel industry is the most powerful lobby in the history of the world, the wealthiest and most powerful lobby in the history of the world. And they have dedicated themselves to trying to block efforts. You know, they want that $20 trillion. And they will do everything they can to get it. And, you know, we have governments like the Harper government that have helped them along. In fact, you know, the Harper government has been rated by those, you know, there's a consortium of international environmental groups that every year gives out the fossil award of the year to, you know, the government that is the most regressive in terms of blocking progress on climate change. And the Harper government's won it something like 6 times in a row. Like they, you know, they just almost declared them the perennial winner. So on the subject of you know, how we can deal with this, I mean, the others have talked about proportional representation very, very well. You know, I think the case for it is summed up really in Bruce's point. You know, when he gave the number, if we have proportional representation, you know, Harper would have 122 seats in the House of Commons, which is not enough for a majority. So I am fully supportive of proportional representation, but I also want to talk about, you know, even without proportional representation, what we can and should be doing, because we've got to get into power in order to bring about proportional representation. And I guess I just want to stress that, you know, that it really strikes me that there is an incredible will to cooperate among progressive elements within, you know, the NDP, the Liberals, and the Greens. And you know, the Climate Change Accountability Act that Bruce brought in and that Joyce brought the Liberals on side, that's an astonishing achievement. You know, I just want to sort of focus on that for a minute. Because, you know, it was brought in, of course, as a private member's bill, which they rarely pass, but, you know, through efforts, through Joyce's efforts and the concern about this issue, it actually managed, amazingly, to make it through the House of Commons. And then, you know, as both Joyce and Bruce have pointed out, we had this incredible thing where you know, the unelected conservative senators actually blocked it. You know, which is, it's almost indescribable how outrageous that is. You know, like we're always hearing, we're always thinking these days about the outrages of the Senate, with good reason. You know, the Duffy and Wallen expense scandals, but they just pale in comparison to the absolute unconscionable scandal that those unelected senators, those conservative unelected senators, blocked the will of the majority of Parliament on something as important as the fate of the earth. I mean, it's just staggering. When I think about it, it amounts effectively to criminal negligence. I guess I just want to conclude by saying that, you know, I think we have an incredible opportunity with the next election.
Right.
You know, to make this an enormous issue, and to show our willingness to cooperate. I mean, after the next election, there's many different scenarios, probably an NDP majority, I would imagine. But even if it isn't, let's say it's some kind of minority situation, you know, we have got to think in terms of cooperating, whether it's you know, through an accord or a coalition or whatever. You know, let's not, the Harper government has tried to spook us with this idea that there's something evil about a coalition. There is nothing evil about coalitions. There's something evil about the way the Harper government operates. I guess I would just conclude by saying that, you know, so before the election, when we don't know what's going to happen, I think it's incredibly important that we make climate change a focus of all our campaigns, and that we talk openly about the possibility, if there's a minority situation, of cooperation among the parties, in which the issue of climate change would be front and center. Thank you very much.